All right, you're live.
All right, hi, thank you for coming to our memoir talk. We know we're up against some of the big ones like reverse harem and TikTok, but you guys came here because you have a story to tell. I'm Sheryl Recinos, I'm the moderator. They chose me, I'm hoping, because they love that I've written a bunch of memoirs. I have 5 that are out, and each of them has like a different part of the story, but when I came to 20Books, I had 1 book, and I didn't know what to do next. And I learned I made a lot of mistakes. So I re-released as series recently because that's what they teach us. And so we're all going to talk to you a lot about what we've learned along the way. And I can explain later what that means to have a series of memoir, because maybe you've got more than one story to tell, or maybe you've got places where you can break it up along the way. So I'm going to introduce my panel, and everybody's going to tell you a little bit about themselves.
Hi, I'm Alycea Snyer. I publish under A.K. Snyer because nobody can spell my name. And I have 2 books out, one on placing a child for adoption, one on learning how to scuba dive and maybe trust my husband a little bit, and a 3rd one coming out in January.
I'm going to pass these around as we go so you guys can look at samples.
Hey, I'm Kellie McIntyre. I'm a family travel advocate, so I am on a mission to inspire families to travel boldly. And my memoir is The Passport Project, 2 sisters ditch middle school for a life-changing journey around the world. And it's a family travelogue with a twist in that I wrote it from my middle school daughter's point of view.
Hi, I'm Amy Liz Harrison, and I wrote Eternally Expecting, a mom of 8 gets sober, gives birth to a whole new life, her own. And then I have a 2nd one called Eternally Awkward, and that talks about ADHD and being diagnosed in midlife, shall we say. And I'm currently working on a children's mental health series.
Hi, I'm Jack, also known as Jonathon Benjamin. That's Jonathon with an O at the end, not an A. And I have written my first book, a memoir entitled American Airman, a memoir of a wounded veteran. And as the title implies, I am a veteran of these United States. I was in the Air Force for 5 years, 12 days, 4.5 hours. And yes, I counted. And I was injured overseas in England. And that's what the book is about. It's about my service, getting injured, and then transitioning into civilian life afterwards. And like my cohort here, Amy, I also was diagnosed with ADHD later in life. So it talks about different abilities that may have come from traumatic injury. Thank you.
Well, this is our panel, and they're excellent, so I hope you guys are enjoying what we're passing around. I believe many of them are going to be selling on Friday. Who has a table on Friday? Okay, so you can find a lot of our books there. Otherwise, wherever fine books are sold, usually Amazon. All right, so starting with our questions down at the end. How did you choose your memoir topic?
When my daughter turned 18, I all of a sudden felt very far away, and like I just had to get all of this out. I had felt pretty settled with placing her for adoption and the relationship that we had and where we were, until something just went like this inside. And I had not planned to write that story. I didn't want to dig into that past. There was a whole bunch of grief. I didn't think that sounded like a lot of fun. But something else decided I needed to get it out anyway. And I write to process, so that it forced its way out of me unwillingly.
Okay, I also never had any intentions or dreams of writing a book, and I've had amazing adventures. I've been to 50 countries, 40 of them with my kids, and so people would always say, you should write a book, and I was like, the travel niche is really saturated, and there are a lot of wonderful travel memoirs, so I didn't think I really had anything that I could add to the conversation. And then, COVID happened and 2020 happened, and I just thought, so everybody was really divided and angry, and I just felt really compelled. I just thought, gosh, if people had seen or experienced a lot of the things that we've seen and experienced, they would see things differently. And I thought, well, travel erases the lines that divide us. And not everybody can travel to the far corners of the earth, but everyone can read a book. So that is what I wrote about.
Well, my memoir topic chose me. And, you know, having discovered that I had a drinking problem was kind of a shock to me. And so having my life just totally pulled down to the depths of the depths and finding myself, you know, raw and broken and just feeling like I didn't know which way was up was actually the beginning of a brand new chapter for me. And that was surprising, it was terrifying, and it was wonderful. But it was something that I had to write about because with these 8 kids, I wanted my story to be told in my own voice. I didn't want my kids to Google me and, you know, then I haven't expressed it to them in a way that is sort of on a shelf and, you know, has the ability to be picked up by somebody and possibly help someone along on their journey. So that's why I chose my topic.
So, I'm ready this time. My memoir was also something that chose me. Like everybody else has been saying, I did not intend to write a memoir. I did not intend to really tell my story until it happened to fall out of me. It was more like forced out of me. Being a wounded veteran, I went through a hellacious recovery. I was on 2 continents, 4 hospitals, and it was a span of 5 years of recovery. I was unable to walk for 18 months. I was inpatient for 2 years, and then outpatient for 3. The book initially started as a thesis project for when I was in college, which, by the way, just despite my doctors, I went to college the year I got out of the hospital, and I got my 4-year degree in 3 years. I myself am still amazed by it. But I was able to use my story as a recovering veteran, which I was still recovering at the time, to write a play for my thesis project. And it may or may not have been inappropriate for it to be suggested, but I worked at the Kennedy Center, and the play that I was in the process of writing, it was suggested by the artistic director that I submit the play for a competition, and it turned out the play got chosen by the Kennedy Center in DC to be produced in my senior year, and they produced it out in Pittsburgh at Indiana University. Yeah, Indiana University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That was fun trying to figure out how to get there. But that aside, my memoir started as this play, and it wasn't until last year, January 4th, 2021, that I decided to start writing the play as a book, and now I have what you see.
I agree with all the panelists. You know, my book fell out of me. As soon as I was finally ready to sit down and write my story, it poured out of me, and it's a long book. It's almost 400 pages of me explaining how I got to the point as a teenager where I was a homeless teenager and trying to survive the streets, and explaining that journey, because a lot of my colleagues wanted to know, because as a physician now, they were asking me what in the world I overcame to become the person I am, because they sensed something was different. And so it was a very different story, but it's something I needed to tell. We all have that story inside of us that we need to tell and can help somebody. Starting back on this side. Memoirs have a different sales strategy than most other books. We've seen that. And they usually sell for a specific audience. Jonathon, who's your audience?
My audience is the American population. That's what I started saying at first. When ignorant young me, all of like 18 months ago, whatever. Point is, I started out thinking everybody is my audience, and it came to my understanding that the book I've written, while it's a book about resilience and hope and determination and all these things coming up against you and you surmounting them, that That's not necessarily for everyone. It's not going to be everyone's type of book that they want to read about. So I think that to whittle it down, like I had to, and like I'm still doing, I think the military veterans specifically are my audience. Civilians are definitely my audience as well, and not just every single civilian, but people who can benefit or benefit someone else by reading this book and helping their veteran community out, or seeking someone who is less able physically and helping them out, or understanding from a different perspective, from the inside perspective, how to help and how to approach them. It kind of still sounds like everybody, but the point is, I think there are specific denominations of the American populace that would benefit from this book: the disabled community, the African American community, men, the Hispanic American community. I'm going through the different characters in the book. College students, retirees. I think those are all very well and able communities that would benefit from my book and who participate as my audience.
Perfect.
Well, this is room for growth for me, basically. I am very not great at sales, shall we say. My audience would be quit lit readers. If you've heard that term before, if you haven't, it's basically quitting drinking or substance use disorder, right? Literature. And so moms, generally speaking, if you were to read my first one, Eternally Expecting, moms maybe 25-ish to 50-ish, but really I don't even like putting any of that in a category, because really truly who it's really for is the people who may wonder if they have a drinking problem, if they've ever sort of had that quiet inner voice kind of say, is this your best life that you're living? Because I had that when I was still in denial, and really just felt alone and felt like maybe I could dig my way out of this somehow. And so that's who I would say my true audience is. But sales strategy, well, that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, I would say that my tribes break down into three different segments of people that I really go after. The first are travelers. I mean, that's obvious. Okay, anybody, whether you're male, female, young or old, if you enjoy travel, those people they tend to gravitate toward travelogues. My next group would be parents, because it is written from a teen and tween perspectives. You have a lot of parents then who are going to buy for those groups. And then, but my third, which has been probably the most important, has been educators. And my beta readers, most of my beta readers, my biggest champions have been teachers. Because the way the book is written, it is very, it interweaves culture, history, language, geography, all kinds of stuff, and it is being used in classrooms, in middle school social studies classes. And so that has been just a whole marketing effort is going for the educators. And I find them in like all the places that you would think of. I mean, Facebook groups for travelers. Podcasts. Going after both travel podcasts, homeschooling podcasts. So like when you're thinking about your memoir, like your tribes are all over the place, and I just encourage you to look at all the different angles, places where you can just get your story out. I mean, and again, just this is random, but I'm just trying to help you think of like different ways that you could target your book. Like my daughters are in a sorority, they're in college now. So their sorority has now featured the book in the magazine. So because your story is personal, there are so many different personal avenues that you can go down, whether it's your hometown paper, hometown magazines, all of those.
The people I wrote it for are not the people I sell it to. I wrote my book initially for my daughter. I wanted to show her who I was at 18, so to help her understand a little bit how I could stomach the idea of not keeping her. And then I also wrote it for a brand new birth mom. Of if you are at that deepest pit today, here is a path out. That was who I wrote it for. Who buys it is almost all bulk orders, and it's largely adoption agencies, which was a surprise to me because I am not kind to the adoption industry in my book. But adoption agencies are using it to provide their birth moms when they have birth moms who are struggling to keep moving. And grief and loss groups, parents who have lost children, groups like that are working through how you heal, how you, like, really tactical. This is one step after another.
Wow.
So you guys see how during the writing process, we're finding all of those places where we can sell, and we're going out and reading those groups in social media and different places, looking for the podcasts, blogs. Take notes, because you're already probably thinking about who your audience is going to be. Go ahead.
So, in thinking about my answer, I do want to add an addendum. I've written this book entirely for the wounded veteran community. I want them to know that it's not the end, that traumatic injury does not define you. And even if it's something so small as, I pulled my back lifting something, or something as extravagant as my best friend who suffered compound brain injuries from IED blasts, and he was early on in the war on terror, so he did not have the benefit of the up-armored vehicles that, cushion the blast and help to prevent loss of life or injury. He is going through a lot, and it's veterans like him who I wrote this book for. It's for people who don't see any other way out, and I just want to encourage them that life can and does get better.
Perfect. And then we'll start back with Alycea. How do you handle difficult topics in your writing? We've all seen books like I'm glad my mom died, things like that. How do you handle those topics in your book? The things that include things like abusive relationships, people who have mistreated you, do you include them in your story?
Yes. Yes, I do. And first draft, you write every horrible thing about that person. I don't care if you still have a relationship with them or not. You write out whatever your soul needs to get out. And then you can take it later and say, do I still want to have a relationship with this person after I publish? And then kind of edit those parts as needed. I adore my mom. My mom is a wonderful person. But my first draft and what came out are very different, because I had a lot of anger for how I ended up alone and homeless at 17, and I was upset, right? So to get all of that out, it adds the emotional depth that you need. I didn't cut it. I repositioned it. So there's a segment in mine where very dear, close people to me said horrible things, and they were trying to help. It was out of love. People say terrible things after, well, at least you can go on with your life. Like just really terrible things. And instead of saying, my sister said this on this date and it harmed me, I put a section of, here are some terrible things that people said, and here are some things that were super helpful. And you have the editing power to not pinpoint, but to include the emotion, take the emotion part of that story, but take the person out of it. That's how I chose to do it. And then I did meet with a lawyer to see if I could get sued for what I put in my book. And he did suggest I soften some of the language when I talk about my father and abuse, and try to put what's in public record only. And so I did work with a lawyer to make sure I was protected.
Well, I would say that with travel, my story is not rooted in tragedy, right? So So there are, situations that are difficult, but they're typically, with a stranger that we're interacting with. It's not somebody that we know in real life, so we're not having to worry about those, personal situations. However, in our story, our climax is being detained in China, being deported from China. Really horrible situation, horrible. So of course, it's all this negative stuff about China. I will never go to China again, and I would be scared to go and be afraid that something else bad would happen. But there was also like a really, there was an airline at fault, and so of course we, talk about China and government and what all went on, but then also just this horrible airline. But I did not, and it was China Eastern Airline, but to keep myself from being sued, it's called Abysmal Air in the book. So, and I too had an attorney go through, my whole book too to make sure. But in anything where I thought, I do not want to get sued for libel, then I changed the name.
Well, difficult topics are kind of my jam. I love difficult topics because that's where you're going to get like the true scoop of how it really was for me. And so amazingly, what has happened as a result of telling my story, when I first got sober, I thought, oh gosh, I just want to hit pause and I just want to go off to treatment. I want to just get better and then come back to the family, this new person, and just look amazing and all of this. And instead, it's a process, right, of recovering out loud and being able to walk through daily stressors and situations and learn how to handle them and gain tools and gain knowledge and learn how to treat people. And so that for me has, just the return of that unintentional investment has just come at me tenfold. Just the topics that I've been able to talk to my first 4 kids who are in the car with me when I got that DUI, our relationships today, I can't even tell you, it has totally shocked me. It is such an amazing surprise to be able to be honest with them, tell them what it was really like, and tell them what I really felt, and have them, not just understand, but kind of have that empathy created. It's been huge for me, just huge. And so, it was, if I were to stand back and say, gosh, was it worth it being totally sort of, in a sense, naked, like soul naked in front of them, I would say absolutely 100%. And anytime I ever, like these ladies, used any person or instance that could maybe be identified, I try to cloud it a little bit by changing the name or some of the details. And I will add, as I wrap up this answer, that I highly recommend a great editor. I have a wonderful editor, and the kinds of things that she would do was just kind of sort of buff out some of the sharp edges where some of my emotional pain was still visible if it was towards somebody else. So yeah, that was my process.
Okay, you asked for it. So I just wanted to make sure you all understand where I'm coming from when I wrote my book. 44 veterans every day commit suicide in America. 44 of our veterans take their own lives. So my book talks about abuse, talks about suicide and death and traumatic injury. These are all really hard topics to really grapple with. And for me particularly, it was hard to see the guys that I would be fighting alongside going through the things that I was writing about and having to relive those moments, because that's how I write. I think somebody else said it earlier, they write to process. And that's what I do. Whenever I write something, it's never just writing to write. And that's fun. But no, I write to either process something I can't grapple or come to terms with, or it's something that I can't logically reason out. For example, I wrote a play recently about Roe v. Wade. I still can't, I know we're not supposed to talk about politics, but yeah, I can't I can't come to terms with it. So when it comes to writing and grappling with hard topics and people, probably should have got a lawyer, but I didn't. I probably shouldn't say that I use alcohol, not to excess, every once in a while. Pray for me. I write and recover. That's pretty much how I process emotion, how I process tragedy or heartbreak or anything really that comes up in life. I write and recover, write through the situation and try to recover from it, having processed it and put it into words on paper. I also have my faith. I grew up in the church. I was abusively religious. Well, my biologicals were abusively religious. I call my parents my biologicals because they forfeited that whole position in my life. But whatever, you can read about it. It's in the book. It's a good story. And then I have my family, the people I call my family. My mom, my pop, and my best friend Kai. They are my root, my rock, my centerpiece. They keep me grounded. They help me to, like how my writing helps me to work through problems, they help me physically work through problems. I can talk it out with them. I can help them to help me understand where the disconnect is and where the synapses are misfiring for me. So that's how I deal with the hard topics. As far as the biologicals,
In my case, I had a lot of people I needed to change names for because I was dealing with a history where a lot of the other people, didn't end up in places of success. I did some serious Google and Facebook stalking of a lot of the people from when I was a teenager, and I was very careful to exclude people in my final draft that really weren't doing well. I found one of them was in prison on meth charges. Out of my book, I deleted the entire section. I was on Jerry Springer as a homeless teenager. I went verbatim from what was in the released tape so he wouldn't sue me because he has the other tapes and I can't remember exactly the phrases that were used. With some of the bad people, I really didn't like my caseworker when I was 17, so I renamed him Guillermo because I don't really like that name. You could pick whatever name you want. And then at work, I was trying to figure out the name I was going to give to the girl who beat me up when I was in juvenile prison. My dad pressed charges because I stole money. Not cool. I was 13. So this girl beat me up, and I didn't know what name to give. And so one of my coworkers, her last name was Rashid, so we named this girl Rashida, and my coworker was going around, she's like, I beat up Sheryl. She bought a book. So you guys can think about things like that. You can get really creative with the names, and if you really don't like someone, pick the name that annoys you the most. But also change some characteristics if you're really trying to protect people, because I know in my story I had a lot of people I needed to protect because they didn't end up in the place I ended up. And so it's something to think about. And then there were parts where it wasn't my story to tell. And so there were things that I ended up having to remove in the final draft that were great for storytelling, but it wasn't my story, so it did not end up in the final book. But I wrote it, so at least I dealt with it and processed it. Okay? Hopefully that helps. I'm sure everybody has questions about whether or not to include dad or mom. What have been your biggest mistakes, anyone on the panel?
I would say my initial cover, I did not love it, and it did not speak to the genre well enough, and it didn't hold enough emotional appeal. It holds emotional appeal after you read the book. When you realize that the image is of a little baby jumper dress that I talk about in the book, but you have to be 3/4 of the way into there before that's the wrong way to do it. So I would say, and I hired my cover out. And I think that I also I still don't love my title, but it's too late to go back and change it. I would absolutely choose a more compelling title. I never could land on one that I like, and so now I'm stuck with what is, but I think I would have kept looking for a title that I loved.
Anyone else who wants to answer?
I would say one of the things that you would have to decide is, do you want editorial reviews, something that you want to get in advance? And depending on what your strategy is, like a lot of people say, you know, you don't need it, it's a waste of money or whatever. And so, long story short, I got a review from School Library Journal. I didn't get one from Kirkus. But at the end of the day, like in my situation, I want to be in schools and I want to be in libraries, and most of them require at least 2 editorial reviews. And I didn't do that on the front end. I was like, because Kirkus you have to pay for. It's like, I don't want to pay for that. That's a waste of money. And you hear that a lot. It's a waste of money. Don't. But every time you take advice or listen to advice, you have to think, does that pertain to your genre? Okay, if you're writing, anyway. So in my situation, it was worth it, and I ended up doing it. I'm getting into schools, libraries, and all of that, but I lost about 6 months of time by doing it after publication rather than pre-publication.
Well, for me, a couple of things stand out. Firstly, I have a podcast, I do some other things, I have my hand in a lot of different pots that are loosely related. And I never sort of really connected all of the dots. So I'd be interviewing somebody on a podcast and, you know, I wouldn't mention that I have this book. I would forget all about it because I was kind of caught up in the moment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, except that, you know, I think sometimes these things take practice and I'm very new. But at the same time, it's okay. It is what it is. And you know, I think that more information was revealed with some of the choices that I made along the way. And the other thing that stands out is I asked my kids for permission. You know, we had this big talk before I wrote it. And I asked their permission, is it okay if I tell this story and I want to tell you how I intend to tell it? And they were overly generous, which I thought was extremely kind. And they're older now, so they were at an age where they could make that decision. But I'm not sure that I think I didn't do the whole thing justice in terms of really explaining what it was going to be like to, you know, have your mom go on some local TV shows, and they weren't upset about it. I just think that they didn't know. So I think that was a bit of a surprise. So I wish that maybe I had given them some possibility scenarios before they happened.
I think that I'm a little close to publication to really have any hindsight that allows me to see where I could have done something different or something better. I just published the book in May, so it's fairly new. I can't really see, nothing in the process happened that I didn't want to happen, and that nothing happened that I regret. So I can't really see any regrets or things I wish I had done differently yet. Hopefully we'll keep it that way.
Or we'll be back next year. So one of the great talks I went to by a memoirist, the lady got up and said, you know, the memoir you write today is different from the memoir you'll write 5 years from now, or the one you would have written 5 years ago. And I sat there and thought about that because that was so true. The story I would write today if I was starting day one on my book is very different from what I told 4 years ago. So knowing that, are you guys going to write more memoirs, and what's next?
Yes. So I did a follow-up one. It started as learning to scuba dive, and the emotional thread that came out of there was I take care of myself, and I don't trust anybody else to do it, including my husband, or maybe especially my husband, which is not a great thing when he's your scuba buddy. It's also not good to forget that you have a buddy, and because you're busy taking care of yourself. So it was a lot of the next step in healing and going on with life, but a more fun topic to couch that into. And then I have another one coming out called Couch Days, which is all about recovering from burnout when you've gotten your life down to spending your days on the couch and just doom scrolling. How do you rebuild yourself out of that? For each of the books, there's always a single person in mind that I'm writing for, because I want to share this with that person specifically, and it helps me stay on track and not go too far with any of the stories, which allows series potential, right? I don't do my full life in any single book. I do a single topic for a single person.
I'm a big fat I don't know. So when the idea finally came to me on my story, and it came to me to be written from my daughter's point of view, it fit so beautifully into what a story structure is supposed to look like, with character arcs and just the whole thing perfectly. And my muse has now gone on vacation, and until she shows up and gives me another brilliant idea, we'll see. And I think it'll come to me when it comes to me, but right now my focus is on really getting this baby off the ground.
Well, since I am taking a sort of left turn and have written some children's books that I have yet to publish, I love that it is from your daughter's point of view, your book is, because these are a series about mental health, and they are from a child's perspective about what it's like to watch an adult go through something like I went through and go through the process of recovering. But as far as a memoir goes, I am currently working on a third one. I kind of like the whole thing in three, I kind of picture it like that. And so that will be eternally evolving, because it will talk a lot about self-development, self-help, just, getting through life. Try to become a better member of society, a more productive member of society, what it looks like to just kind of spend the rest of my days as a curious learner. And that's what I hope and intend to do. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds, because I don't totally have an exact idea, but that's okay. The first two books, so each of those had totally different processes associated with the way that they came about once I started writing. And so it's kind of exciting. I enjoy the process a lot, because I don't know really what's around the corner. So it's going to be fun to see.
I have no idea if I have another memoir in me. I probably do. However, my memoir as it stands has covered my entire life. So, what else do you do? Touche. But I do have another book on the precipice. It's another nonfiction book. I haven't started it. I haven't started it yet, but I think that's where my mind is going, just staying in line with nonfiction genre. I've been writing for the theater since 2018, so I still write for the theater as it stands. It's not like I'm not writing anything. I do write for the theater still.
Perfect. We're all working on those 20 books. We're opening it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, is, like you said, changing the name to protect people, but is changing the name enough, or is there more to it than just changing the name?
I got excellent legal advice on this one. It is changing the name and making them unidentifiable. So I come from a very small town, where if I had changed his name but left that he worked at the station house as a cook, it doesn't matter that I changed his name. There's one restaurant, there's one cook, it's that guy. So change the name and the details. You can make up a restaurant. You can change enough of the details to keep the story and the emotion the same, but the details do not have to be the same. That's how you end up protecting yourself.
I have a couple questions, and apologies, I've already lost my voice. But first of all, so how do you even decide between writing a memoir or, for example, like a how-to series or something? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I have, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate here. I have tinkered with how to create an adoption plan, because it's something that agencies lie to birth moms if they don't have the info. I don't want to be that guru. I don't want to work in that industry. I don't want to grow. That is not the career I want to have. If it's any, yeah, that was my deciding point. I don't know if everybody else struggled with that.
I just shared my experience, and so I didn't really have any how-tos because I didn't want to speak for anybody else. That was just what worked for me.
Same here. I don't think there's a how-to on how to live. That's what my book is about. It's how to live and how to manage trauma.
So a lot of people have asked, just because we travel a lot, you know, to almost like a how-to world school, how to go around the world as a family, or how to. But I don't know. That is not what I was inspired to write. I think there are other resources for that, and I wanted to write something that was more inspiring than, I guess, practical. And also, I have a website where I do deliver just some more just logistical information, but I think I just wanted this story to be a story.
Okay, thanks. And in the back corner, you had your hand up.
When it came to Tara Westover, when she published her memoir, she used her real name, but she changed the names in the books. But the problem is that once it became this massively successful novel, the press got a hold of it, and they ended up finding out the real people's names, and then her brother threatened to sue her, the one that abused her, and I mean, and of course, he actually did abuse her, and people witnessed it, so you couldn't do. So he ended up dropping that idea, and you can't even find it in the news now, but it was in one of the news reports. So in my memoir, I don't name anybody. I don't even name me. Not a soul. And there are no names of places. There are no names. There's like like Quiet Cop and Sergeant, or things like that, where, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I don't put anybody's name in to protect myself.
That's definitely one approach. I know for myself, I included my family members' names because the story is indisputable. They're not happy, but they shouldn't have done what they did. Yeah. All right, next question. Yes.
Maybe this dovetails with the question about why not a how-to book, because what was the decision process about marketing it as a memoir and not writing it as a novel, an autobiographical novel? I mean, you're using the craft of story and dialogue and all, you know, sort of like those elements that go into a novel and telling the story. Why not just make it fictional? Why were you set on making it a true story, and say this really happened? Was that super important?
I feel like that a true story is just more compelling than fiction. And so that's why I wanted to tell this true story.
The power of my story as a memoir is what led me to write it as a memoir instead of creative nonfiction or narrative I didn't want to leave any imagination or make it seem like I made this story up, because it's unbelievable the things that veterans have to go through when they recover, and the things that their family puts them through sometimes, or the things that they have to come up against when they transition into civilian life. And having it come from a true story, a memoir, instead of something fictional, made it that much more powerful.
And we can probably do about one more question. You had your hand up earlier, yes.
I would like, I don't know any of you, so I don't know if any of those are your real names or your pen names. So my question is, do you use pen names when you're doing something like Memoir and kind of, or are you using your real names, and do you have advice either way?
I sat with that question for a while, right? There's huge taboo, oh my gosh, you gave your kid away, right? And also my book talks about rape and it talks about my sexuality. So I'm like, well, is this what I want people to know about when they Google me? How am I work in IT. This is a very conservative industry. I decided that I wanted it with my real name, and that I was going to get over the rest of that. That if I'm putting this out here, I am putting this out here, and I'm done worrying about it. That said, I found an amazing company, and other companies maybe didn't hire me, and I fit into exactly the right company that thinks this is the kind of person they want. And so I haven't had negative repercussions that way. I have had, or maybe I've missed opportunities. They weren't the right opportunities for me. I have zeroed in on better by being more transparent.
For me, I'm a practicing physician, and I took a huge gamble, but I decided that I didn't want to work somewhere where they couldn't value all of me. And maybe it has closed down opportunities, but it's opened up so many opportunities. We can talk privately about all of that, but it's been an amazing process. And so what you get out of it is what you put into it. All right, we're done. Feel free to come up and ask any additional questions.